Thank you, and good morning, everyone. How are we doing here in San Francisco? All right, so where are my friends from Tennessee, anyway? Can you give me a shout-out? All right, well, we had a little conversation at the bar last night. We won't go over that. How about my friends from New England, the 6 New England states? Anybody here? Just shout it out up front. Very nice. Glad to see you all. It really is a pleasure to be here, and I'm not here to say Gear Up needs to go away. That's nonsense. I'm here to say that the challenges, the successes, the advances you've made need to be integrated into the future of education, and they need to define education reform more fully in this country. And that's a challenge, it's an opportunity, but there's no better group in the world to lead us forward than you. And I've got some ideas about how to do that and what that means. But I'm here to tell you that change is coming. School and education are revolutionizing before us. There's some big questions about how it's going to happen, who it's going to happen for. But the pace of change is fast, and our job is to guide it, shape it, and make sure it's an equitable opportunity for everyone, because our country's future depends on it. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I want to start just by thanking NCCEP, the Gear Up program, also Ranjit, the board, Betty, Paul Ortiz. Shout out for Betty, new staff person who helped guide me. I'm a wandering presenter, and I got here in part because Betty made sure I did. Thank you. And also to the rest of you, just for your courageous efforts. I mean, 500,000 young people's lives are better because of the work you do. And there are thousands more that are moving forward and millions more we need to reach, and we will. I was introduced as, I was a former commissioner of education, and I also spent a year and a half trying to move a big high school in Providence, Rhode Island. And the last shout out is to a colleague of mine, Mary Harrison is here. She's an NCCEP board member. And Mary, I want to say that we're lucky at Nellie to have you, and NCCEP is lucky to have you also. So thanks for your service. So my presentation, do I have an edge? I hope it softened a little bit. I used to be, someone once introduced me as very affectionately as someone you're kind of like a dog that has a towel in its mouth because of the ardent nature with which I repeat myself. But there's an urgency and an incompleteness and an inspiration I carry, which is from the experience I've had, which is much like yours. I've been with families who have lost people. I know the story of the young black men who are missing, and I'll talk about that. I've seen the tragedies that we face as a society, and I'm just tired of it. And it's time for the rest of us to be more intolerant of the change and the pace of change and the kind of change that we see in this country. So the good news, bad news is I've got 3 parts of my talk. I'm going to tell you something you already know. I'm going to propose a solution that is filled with treacherous risk. And then finally, I'm going to exhort you to be the leaders of that movement. So I know that sounds really promising and exciting. It's wrapped in the packaging of what my wife will say, which is the more I talk about something, the less she understands about it. So we'll see how it goes today. All right, so I'm going to move us forward and start here. Great. So this is part of what you already know. The future brings many, many challenges. Preparation, the scale of preparation just increases every day. Whether you're thinking about preparedness for jobs or prepared to lead in our community or prepared to have a successful and enjoyable life, the standards and outcomes and what it means to be ready for this has changed dramatically. So in the Northeast, which is a small part of our country, we've done some analysis, and we know something. We know that the pace of change and how students are getting ready is growing. But the problem is that readiness is growing at a very slow pace. And we need readiness to increase at a more rapid pace because we need more young people succeeding at levels commensurate with post-secondary. You all work every day for that. Our country's future depends on it, and individual futures rest on it. High school graduation is like the 8th grade graduation of yesteryear, and we need to think about it more like that than a legitimate endpoint. So here's the good news, bad news. We're improving, but we're moving too slowly. Looked at a different way. At our current rate of change, we're going to reach 100% readiness. It's just going to be the year 2170. If you're in a poor community without a lot of resources, the year is 2300. A place like Boston, because readiness on average in New England is about 50%. In Boston, it's 18. In Hartford, it's probably in the low 20s. And of course, we know who we're talking about in terms of readiness and the futures we're describing. If you double the rate of change, things get a little better. It's just barely the end of this century, but it's still in the 2100s for the places where folks like you work. So this is the good news, bad news, but it's not such a sad story, and it's not the end story. But the result is that we sacrifice too many young people. So you know these folks, you know these kids. And you know that the kind of percentages we're talking about are too low to sustain ourselves and move forward. So what do we do? Well, we talk about real change that will lead to the attainment of skills like this. Think of the skills that kids need as a woven rope of sorts. One strand is the basic knowledge. One is the higher order skills we talk about, problem solving. And the third is the dispositions that we seek to imbue in our learners and our charges and our friends, which is the dispositions around efficacy, sense of learner, sense of self, a sense of direction. And it's these three skills woven together that lift up learning and enable young people to move forward, because this is what today's world demands. So the situation is tough today, but with the ever-increasing bar that describes the kinds of skills and knowledge that people need to attain, the challenge increases every day. So one of our solutions, the more of what you know, is an advancement of a kind of engagement that I'm going to review very quickly for you. And we call it student-centered learning. It's a relative in the personalization family, and it describes a sea change in the way we engage students. It's got 4 parts described by this: personalization, anywhere, anytime, student agency, and ownership, and of course, personalization. So what does it take to be personalized? Well, the solution it solves, obviously, is that one size doesn't fit all. Now, unfortunately, this could be today's classrooms. It's not. But they look a lot like this today, and more customization is needed. Why? Not just to be fair, but because we know a lot more about brain development and how people learn. And it's not new information. Dewey's known this. Horace Mann knew it also, and other great educators. But the reality is that we need to think more completely. So, like these students at Life Academy across the bay in Oakland, learning is customized, attends to their needs and interests, tailored feasibly to attend to them as learners and to meet them where they are. And that's what being personalized means. So we say student-centered learning is anywhere, anytime. You know, these days have passed. We all know this story about the calendar that described our learning. In today's world, we need to think about learning as like when a bee or a butterfly flits from place to place. Learning happens in a lot of different places, and kids pick up learning, and it gets pollinated, and it changes from place to place, and they grow it. And then we get tired, they got to stop, and we got to provide these places where they can re-energize themselves, these charging stations where, like Gear Up and the other programs that are so important. But learning, it doesn't just happen in one place at one time. We know that learning happens in a lot of places, and student-centered learning is about going beyond the classroom walls and engaging learning in all sorts of places and all sorts of times. So we look at these young people from Stonington, Maine, and this is Stonington, way to go, shout it out. All right, where they integrate marine biology with the resources around them. They live on the coast, so they use it, and that's what student-centered learning is. Or it's this young boy in Reynoldsville, Ohio, who has a different way of being anywhere, anytime. He gets to travel the world via strong connections and virtual learning and real-world learning that starts in the classroom and extends beyond the school walls and around the world. So we say student-centered learning is anywhere, anytime. And student-centered learning is competency-based for us. This is an interesting concept. You know, we give report cards, and this person got a pretty good set of grades, but still it represents 80% completeness and mastery. Because a B, B minus, is not mastery or 100% attainment of skills and knowledge. So I'm going to steal a little thunder from Sal Khan, who's, you know, twice the educator I've ever been, and he's a brilliant man. He's got a lot of great ideas, and you may hear this from him, because he says in his book that thinking about competency-based learning is like thinking about the construction of a house. And imagine if building a house were not guided by the completion of standards and criteria and knowing when it's done well, but it was based on a 4-week schedule. So you got 1 week for each floor. You got 1 week for the foundation. Week passes, it was a little rainy, worker showed up late. Inspector comes to the foundation, looks down and says, well, you're missing some rebar. The cement's still curing, it's a little wet. But I'm going to give you a C+, because I know you tried really hard. And then you go to build the first floor. Things go better, people show up, the weather's good, you got your act together, the contractor comes around. Okay, you get a B+, because it's going better. And so on and so on. And the story is obviously this: on a poor foundation, that house does not stand. And on poor foundations, our learners cannot stand. And explains why they fail, they drop out. We've moved them along. The readiness rate I described in New England is at 50%. Our graduation rate is at 85%. There's a problem there. Moving forward people on foundations that are insecure. So, like New Haven High School in the community in New Haven, Connecticut, another interesting example of student-centered learning, where learners move forward when they're ready. So it might take you 2 years, it might take you 3 years, it might take you 4 years, it might take you a little longer. Now, there's some interesting things about this idea of pacing and competency-based approaches or proficiency approaches or mastery approaches. So I'll say two things. One, on the good side, people point to Finland all the time as an international example of excellence. And I've been to Finland. And I would hold up our educators and our parents and our students, and if there was some kind of education Olympics in terms of the kind of people we have, the effort they put forward, and particularly the skill of our classroom educators, we would win the gold medal every time. But in Finland, they had better results, and there's some reasons. They have a different culture, they got a deep national commitment, they outlawed private schools in the 70s to make sure everybody had to attend public schools, and they take a competency-based approach, because when you're in classrooms in Finland, you were 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds in the same class. You were with 16-year-olds and 15-year-olds who were both in their second year. They're not sophomores, they're not juniors, they're not seniors. Now, so there's precedent for this, and it's not a new idea. I hang out occasionally. I've got this patio cabinet of guys who I live near me. They're still trying to figure out exactly what I do. I work at a foundation. They have no idea what that is. And then I tell them, you know, one of our big ideas is that we want to advance people when they know things. And we want to move, and we want to get them ready. You know, and we think that connecting with the real world's important. And they just look at me, and they just wonder, what have you all been doing for so long? And it reminds me, and I'll mention this a little later, when I was commissioner, I used to meet with the Taxpayers Association. You know, pre-Tea Party, very conservative group. And they would tell me, you know, we're just tired of paying for education that doesn't work. And I said, well, I know, but we really got to fund education. It's really important. And they would say it again, we're tired of paying for what's not working. And I said, I know, but we really need resources. And they said, you're not hearing us. It's not the resources. Now, this may not be completely believable, but it's true, and public data will tell you. People are willing to pay for education. It's important to them. But they won't pay for what they don't think is working. So we move on, and they understand that there's a complex mission that I talked to them about the reasons why we're in the state we're in. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But student-centered learning is also competency-based. And it involves deep student ownership. Now, this isn't just to be nice, but I got some bad news for you. You know, we've moved through a lot of things in our country, and we're undone, right? We have not finished examining and figuring out sexism, racism, gender bias. And I'll tell you, our schools are ageist. They're filled with young people who we don't consider full agents of their learning, and we need to make a change in that direction. I think we all know that. I appreciate that. It's a big challenge. Most of us are adults here. It's something we grew up with. It's hard to avoid, just like all the isms. It's not something you can just think yourself out of easily. But there's another reason, which is we've done some research, and of course it confirms what we all know. When you engage learners in making decisions about what they're doing, it incites motivation. So now I know, and I've worked in high schools my whole life in all sorts of schools, and I know that when you sit around long enough, it just looks like the kids just don't want to, and there's some who don't. And they're hurt, and we can do something about them. But overall, too many of them are unmotivated and uninspired because of what we do with them and the expectations we have, and they're just too low. And they're ready to stand up, and the middle majority are ready to move forward and excite us with their learning, their motivation, and their engagement, and their leadership. So like this, in Hartford's Journalism and Media Academy, this young woman is out of school a lot. She participates as a videographer, and she has a big say in her own assignments, her own work. The criteria for success is clear, but the assignments and the way she approaches her projects is up to her, and that's about student ownership. So one summary is like this. You know, it's stuff you've heard before. One size doesn't fit all. Learning happens in lots of places. It's about what you can know and do, not how much time you've endured in a seat. And it's about responsibility incites motivation, and we need to give it. So that's our formula. That's what we're working on. We don't provide set models. I've named a bunch. We've got dozens of videos that describe this. You all are in schools that are doing some of this. We're talking about a radical re-engagement of our young people. And the elevator speech I give, that's the shortest, that I say, you know, it's just time that we lined up learning and how we organize learning with what is known about learning. And if we did that, we'd have a student-centered future. So is it a fad? Is it a wave? Is it a trend? Is it the future? Well, I say this is coming. The question is, who is it coming for? The world is specializing. It's distributing. We started this work 8 years ago. We never understood the enormous momentum that educational technology would provide, both the vehicle and the distraction that it can be for big change. There are 37 states considering competency-based policies. New England is full of them. Famous states like Massachusetts, for us, it's a bellwether state. Massachusetts ends up being one of the highest performing states in the country, and the leadership there in the business community has come to see that it's time to deeply reconsider the approaches we use. So there's hope. There's the harbingers in New England. You're not meant to be able to read this list. It represents the dozens, if not hundreds, of communities moving forward, and it represents the thousands of communities across our country that are exploring these kinds of approaches. And so again, the short version is this. We think we're too much in the first set. Learning is the great variable, the great bell curve, the great distribution by zip code, because the treatments are constant, and we need to consider flipping that over. Now, I'll say that this kind of learning is messy. It's kind of like cooking, right? So you need tools. You got to try to do things. You got to get the kids' hands dirty. They get to try and fail and try again. They got clear goals. And like cooking, it's not measured by a fill-in-the-bubble test. You don't go to a restaurant. Now, I know there's those satisfaction cards, but when you think about how good the food was, they don't send you a Scantron bubble test to fill out. I'm a big fan of Food Network. Anybody here watch Food Network? Okay, I have the Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives app on my phone. Anybody wants to go eat lunch after, come see me, because I know where the great spots are. But when those guys win that show, when they have those competitions, it's more complex. It's not, did you deliver the meal, right? There's often a three-part rubric, a multiple dashboard, if you will, of indicators. Dashboard's about, were you creative? Did you transform the materials? I love that one. Did you take the potato and turn it into a dessert, like McDonald's has done for years? That's the secret to the thick milkshake, by the way. And that is true. Creativity, did you transform the materials? Taste, does it taste good? What's the third category that they always care about? Presentation, does it look fancy? So of course, learning and measuring success in learning is about taking a multimodal approach, and that's why at the foundation we support varied approaches to assessment that demand that learners show what they can do. We start with formative assessments that really help us to understand where they are, and then expect them to demonstrate in varied ways what it is they've learned. So we get to say this, and yet we still ask this question. There's leadership, there's movement, I'd say there's a growing movement, but we're stuck. So why? Why are we still here? When we really need our system of education to be like an orchestra, with the parts playing in tune around the learners, different sheets of music playing together in harmony to move learners forward, who are at the center of this picture. Why is that transition hard for us? Why is education stuck in the past? Why are we still treating it like that little girl standing in the field with the milk buckets? Well, we're not. It's not that tragic. It's not that secure. It's not that firm. But in general, the change is hard to make. I'm going to talk a little bit about why and what the role of Gear Up could be in moving things forward. So I'm going to present an idea about systems change, and it's got three parts. I'd suggest that the definition of system change in this country can be put in three buckets. Most of what we do is repair. We take results and we remediate them. Lately, we've been into reorganization. And what we're suggesting is that we need to think about renovation. I'll talk a little bit more about each of these. So, in repair, the activity is to provide remedies to address poor results. So we do this. We make up for things. Or we apply applications and extra applications at certain parts of learners' careers to advance them. But they're not core pieces of the core system. They're add-ons. The good news is these approaches in repair provide immediate results. You can see them, you can feel them. Things get better. The work you do to touch your students has immediate results. You advance them forward in the days and weeks and hours and minutes that you move them forward. And it's essential work to repair because the system is in need of advancing. It is not producing the results we need, as the data around readiness provides. Now, the problem with repair is that it sustains the current system. There's a guy named Clay Christensen who's got some pretty interesting ideas about change. He wrote a great book called Disrupting Class. He made a prediction about online education that's coming true. Really a real leader in thinking about change. But he will tell you that repairing the core system in some ways makes excuses for it. So there's a community in Massachusetts that we have worked with a little bit that has a really excellent alternative education program. And they were seating about 100 kids a year, the kids who couldn't take it in the core system, and they recaptured their high school. And they had this program, and they approached us and said, we want to use this program, this competency-based, diploma plus-based program that's working for these kids, and we want to really grow it. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to move it from 100 seats to 200 seats. And that, to me, indicated that it was a catch basin for those they didn't understand how to work with. And I asked them, they have 4,000 kids in their high school. I said, how come you don't want 2,000 seats? They said, because the kids are moving forward, they don't all need it. We're graduating 85% of our kids. I said, how do they do in post-secondary? We're not sure, we don't track that data. And to me, that makes it half a promise. So in some ways, repair efforts that show immediate results can be seen as really supporting the system. Even our best charter schools, which are our public schools, and they're good innovations. But it's interesting how they just fill a space, but they never really fill the whole space. A lot of people worried about charter schools dominating the education landscape. It's not going to happen. And that's a problem and a good thing at the same time. This kind of innovation, this kind of repair is based on adjustments in practice, and it's dependent on these people to implement it. So there are lots of ways you can do good repair work without deep authorization, without enormous policy change. And we do it every day. That you all are repairing heroically. The teachers you work with are making a difference, despite the way the system is organized, despite the traditional framework, the batch processing that we accept. You're making heroic contributions to the futures of young people. But why should it be so hard for you? So reorganization in systems change. This is when you move the parts around. You get sustained changes in structure. The irony, of course, and the data around our efforts at turnaround opportunities in this country, is that you get very similar results and a very strong bell curve. Efforts to simply reorganize the parts of a system that is not working, systems thinkers will tell you, produce similar results, and that's what we're seeing. These kinds of changes depend on policy shifts because they're bigger, more dramatic. They involve money, jobs, and they're really in the hands of managers. So the nasty work is given to the folks who manage our education system. So I was a deputy commissioner in 1997. It was like ages ago. It's really kind of embarrassing, a long time ago. I know I look young and handsome, but I'm older than I look. And we were advancing a performance-based, competency-based system. And then there was a little law came out of Washington called No Child Left Behind. And it pushed us forward. It was my job to implement that law. And so we did our best we could. We sat down with our superintendents and our communities, and we explained the kind of mission that we were on. And it was partly a result of that effort and my hands-on work as a turnaround overseer with the name Special Master, a title that the young black men and black women in my community did not enjoy for me. But that was in our hands to restructure, recoup, without the real concrete renovation support that we think is needed. So renovation is when you strengthen the foundation, when you get down to weight-bearing walls. We would say the day is past when we can, like an old house, we can add on an addition or fix the roof or get new appliances. But it really is time to get down to the weight-bearing walls and reconsider. Now, strengthening foundations anticipates redesign. Because anybody here who has actually renovated a home knows that you get some choices. When you get down to the weight-bearing walls, you can make that living room a little bigger. You can move the kitchen. You can put the playroom upstairs. You can get this friggin' washer dryer up near the bedroom. I wish I had that. You can do that kind of thing. But it's high risk and high reward because it's hard work. I mean, renovation, everybody here has experienced that, right? Like, I'm constantly moving the furniture around in my house. I'm putting something new on the walls. But the idea of really taking the time to get down is very hard. And in a public system, it means attending to culture. The system theorists will tell you that culture is the strongest lever for systems change. The weak levers for systems change, the ones on the bottom of the list, changing practices, moving structures around, reorganizing, repair. The higher ones, attention to paradigms, culture, tackling beliefs and values, and most essentially, engaging in discussion about purpose. System purpose. Why are we in this business? And that's a matter of public engagement. The publics are authorizers of our work. And we have some pretty strange ideas at Nellie May about engaging the public, and you're going to hear them. This is the part where I talk about trying to do something that's untested and difficult, but I'm telling you now, I believe it's the way forward to renovate and really rescue our education system in this country. So purpose can be described like this, and Jefferson had a good idea. He set up the system, and his other founding brothers and sisters set up the system because they knew we needed some leaders who were better educated to lead our society forward. So they were driven by Plato's concept of the 500 and the Republic, and it might have been a good idea. Might not have been a good idea, but history says we did okay as a country. We moved forward globally. We're obviously well known. We have a good and mixed reputation. But we're a heroic story of success, and it's based significantly on our public education system. But it's not lost on anyone in this room that the core purpose is, while the espoused purpose of our education is equal opportunity, the tacit purpose of our system is choosing and sorting and culling, and providing people with tickets, rare lottery tickets, to advance to the next stage of learning called higher education. I'm not an expert in higher ed. I don't know if universal access is the right answer. I'm not sure if we should be asking people to pay more. I know there are renovations going on in higher ed, but I'm here to tell you again that the purpose of public K-12 education needs to be, we need to change it, and it needs to look more like this. If our society is going to advance, our commitment more fully to all learners moving forward, and re-embracing the notion that Jefferson and others put on the table that education is not a consumable private good that is only rooted in the future of an individual. I was at a town meeting with some people talking about competency, and I explained, so I had this guy in the back who's kind of, asking all the hard questions, and he goes, so let me ask you this. Kid moves here from somewhere else. They can do everything as 12th graders supposed to do. They do it excellently. They've mastered all this stuff. Do you give them a diploma? I said, absolutely. Give them a chance to do some other things. Don't rob them of high school. But they are qualified. And if they're qualified, we got to recognize that credit. They learned it in different places. It all didn't happen in school. I said, it's okay. And then he gave me the trick question. He goes, does that family get to ask for a tax rebate on their investment and contribution to education because they didn't use the system? And I said for a moment, and I said, absolutely not. Your taxes don't pay tuition. Your taxes pay to nurture a public institution. You don't get a rebate from the fire department because you didn't use their services this year. Truck didn't have to come to my house. I decided to fast. I didn't drink water for 3 weeks. Please don't send my water bill. I mean, in that case, everyone pays a base amount, and it is dependent on use, but you've got to be able to contribute. And the great part was the people in that room who weren't, didn't spend as much time perseverating on these arcane, weird, complex ideas, overthinking everything. They knew better. And there were people in that room who stood up and said, of course not. Because the quality of education is equated with the quality of our community and its future. And some people know that naturally, and some have forgotten. But there's a chance to remind them, because there's a way forward through this mess. And it's not easy, and it won't be believable, but I'm here to tell you that it is true that the public in the United States in general has two great concerns. They wish things would be working for their own. They want their kids to move forward. They care a lot about who their own children, the children of people they know. It is true. And it's hard for people to understand and commit and embrace the futures of others, but it's not impossible. They also think there's a solution to fixing the broken system that is school. And what is that? What is that solution? Who can tell me? If we only went back to when? High quality teaching is not the first thing. People wish that we went back to the education system that we really never had. If we just went back to like the Leave It to Beaver phase, if we could just put ourselves in a place where, we were just focusing on the basics, right? Anybody ever hear that before? Just got to go back. And that's a natural position. The good news is that we spent a lot of money doing a lot of research that suggests that that is not an enduring or permanent situation. We actually, as educators, dig a hole that meets people where they are and reinforces the notions around individualism, self-focus, and repairing a broken system by going back to the basics. But there's a way to shift that conversation, because it turns out that Americans are better than that. Americans have other values, and you know what they are. We value fairness. We actually value justice. We really like progress. And we like preparation, and the irony is that we love getting ready. Whether it was like getting in the boat over from Europe the first time, or surviving some horrible journey later, or getting here and packing those wagons to go west, or arriving as new immigrants and figuring out where our communities were. People get ready, and Americans get ready really well. Now, we're a little out of practice because we've gotten a little tired. We're not quite as motivated. That happens in successful societies. But there's a way forward. And what I would suggest is here's another metaphor. It's a picture of the night sky. And I would say those bright lights up there, well, one of them is Gear Up because it glows bright in the sky. The other is Nellie Mae. Ranjit's up there. Mary, your star, I can see it also. You're there too. You guys all have a star up there. But physicists will tell us that contrary to the universe of seen light that I would call the ed-reform community, there's a great, huge volume of what's called dark matter that guides everything. 50 to 60% of the gravitational weight and mass in the universe, unseen. And for education reform efforts, the public represents that unseen matter. Untapped energy. Endless, fusion-like source of motivation to move education forward. Now, people don't realize it all the time. I work with a lot of policymakers. The policy is a public event, whether it's trailing or forward-driven. So No Child Left Behind was a political bargain made in 2000 between Republicans and Democrats. It was the great gamble. Who would win? Would the Republicans see a predicted failure and be able to move? Would Democrats be able to see predicted failure and move to even greater funding for schools based on negative results? Or would a conservative movement that wanted to privatize education and advance choice win out because of the very predictable failure of achieving the impossible benchmarks in that law? And the good news is that time is passing. We're getting smarter and moving past that frame toward a more renovation frame. But at that time, that was certainly a political motivation driven by a few key leaders. But those people were elected officials, and they were speaking for their public. They were tired. They were like the Taxpayer Association I mentioned a little while ago. They didn't want to pay for something that wasn't working. And the main argument for No Child Left Behind was flat returns on increasing investments. And it was an easy position for politicians to take. But make no mistake, it was rooted in public opinion and public will. And now a trailing effect, of course, is the fatigue that the general public has with our very narrow-minded assessment and standards regime. Now, it's good to have outcomes, and we like the Common Core. We don't fight against that, because if you have a distributed, student-centered, personalized, anywhere, anytime, student agency, competency-based approach to learning, you better have a set of strong outcomes and know what they are. Or that system will simply be applied and advance those who can and who are wealthier and leave the others behind. So having safeguards is important. But the public is smarter than we think. They're tired of narrow testing. They want a dashboard. They want education to be more like cooking. And we're trying to advance that. Now, it's not easy, and it's not an easy sell, but the opt-out movement now is telling us, and I'm telling you, there's a new target coming forward, and it's the nature of the outcomes. Because it's my hope that people grow some fatigue with the other end of that equation, which is college and career ready is a good focal point, especially for populations that have been oppressed and who experience the lack of opportunity that too often defines our society and their opportunities. But it's not enough. The next thing is the nature of the standards, because people know, and everybody in this room knows, like, I want my daughters ready for college. There's nobody who's ready for career coming out of high school, but I have bigger aspirations for them as a parent. I want them to live fulfilling lives. I want them to know how to build relationships. I want them to challenge authority. I want them to learn how to raise a family, and I want them to have time to enjoy themselves and pay attention to the world around them. And those are the standards, and the redefinition is coming, and our public's going to lead that conversation, and you're going to help them get there. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to pay attention to some important research. So we spent a lot of money, as I said, and we unpacked some research about the narrative in education, the dominant narrative, and how people think education, how normal people think education. And we found some things that are going to sound pretty familiar. This is reaching 20,000 USers in focus groups, on-the-street interviews, and surveys. So the general findings, they apply across the country. They're not just regional. We tested these and moved out of the region to come to these conclusions. Pretty complex. This is the part that my wife was warning you about, because I'm not an expert in this. And so while I've probably messed up the previous parts of my presentation, this is where everything really goes awry, okay? So, when we do this public work, we ask people, what's at stake and why should I care? And of course, especially since we frame things by saying the system is broken and we want it to work for every individual, that's where they start. How many people have been in a school district where the administration has said, you know, we're going to have to pink slip a lot of teachers if we don't really do something about our budget? Anybody? Common strategy across the country, and it's a scare tactic, and it works. In my own town, it was the tiles in the ceiling. We needed a new building because one fell out and it almost hit a student desk. It was a 5-ounce piece of what was probably still asbestos was falling on the floor next to a kid, maybe going to hurt them. So the next stage is we ask people, so, you know, what do we need to do? How does it work? What's the system? And they identified a triad, if you will. It's very interesting. People have a very firm, clear picture of the system of education. It's very persistent. But it's this. It's 3 people. It's the relationship between the teacher, the parent, and the student. That defines the system of education. Public doesn't think about assessment. They don't think about accountability. They don't think about funding. They don't think about gear up. They think about this relationship. And this explains a lot. Because if you think the system of education is defined by 3 distinct population groups, and you think it's broken, what do you do to fix it? You replace the people, or you wish they would change. So you blame the teachers, you blame the kids, or you blame the parents. And that's the stage of ed reform we've been in that's defined by turnaround policies responding to poor achievement. General public thinks that if it's, the other things involved in this triad is just willpower and that quality education is a caring teacher. And that we know from the work on personalization that caring matters. Having close relationships, expressing caring. When I was at Hope High School, we pressed this to move forward, and I had one teacher who came forward at one point and said, you know, the reality is I don't care. And of course I'm thinking, okay, this person's time is limited in the school, but for the time being, the best I could say, I said, well, fake it. Act like you care. Let's see how that works. But it's not enough to care. You need to be expert. We know that. Where and when does learning happen? Well, the public follows the stream. It's a traditional system. It's broken. We want to go back to basics. It's this, if people just tried harder and this relationship was better and these people were better, you know, and teachers cared more, then if the kids, we could just put the kids in these boxes, teach them subject matter for 60 minutes, and they'll get it. Because it's just a matter about trying hard. Who's in the way? Well, we know who's in the way. It's the unions are the problem. And teachers, students, and parents who don't care. So what's the solution? Well, we got to get back to basics. And people just got to try harder. And learning, if they just would sit still and participate in the 10, maybe we could get to them. How do we know? Well, the standardized tests, they must mean something. So despite the opt-out movement, people think we're doing something. You got to measure this, and this narrative includes this stop. You just got a standardized test, and the real measure is individual financial success. And so what are we going to do to improve this situation? Well, we can't. We got to get back to basics. Make that triad of uncaring people care more. Maybe if we just pressure them hard enough, they'll care more. Now, I do that regularly with my own family and my own daughters because I'm a stern, nasty dad. But I've learned, I tell the story about the person who's walking and the sun in the rain, the sun in the wind. Anyone know that Aesop's fable? I talk to my daughter about that regularly because she is more like the wind. The wind came out, there's a contest. Who can get the coat off of the person walking in the street? And the wind goes first and blows and blows and blows. And of course, the person holds the coat tighter and tighter, and the wind's exhausted after a little while. And then the sun goes and shines their mellow rays onto the person and gets warmer, and they loosen their buttons, they loosen the belt, and they take the coat off. So it's not about being this lovey-dovey patient approach, but simply blowing more wind at the triad and trying to help move people forward and wish that we had the kids we don't have. Wishing that parents who live heroic lives to move their families forward would just try a little harder. And wishing that the heroic educators who populate our industry as professionals are seen as a great problem. It's not enough to ask them to try harder. And maybe if we just make education more like a business, things will get better. So I'm embarrassed to say we spent a lot of money uncovering this narrative. One, I think that most of the people in this audience could probably have rehearsed for us. Am I right about that? Sound familiar? Well, the bad news is that we start people off in this way. We frame the conversation in difficult ways. And I'm seeing my time card come up. It's going to take a little longer. So the alternative frame is this. And there's good news. The narrative that we promote is one around future preparation. It turns out people love to get ready. They want to move forward. They know it's about preparing for the workforce, and they know it's for a little more. They value progress. So we are now advancing and spending a ton of change hosting community conversations rooted in this idea about narrative. And we don't go in and advance student-centered learning. We don't describe a new form of engagement. We don't talk about systems change. We start with a simple question. What does your community need in terms of what its learners are going to learn so that both have a progressive and positive future? And it's very interesting what people come up with because they talk about the woven rope. They tell you the things kids need. They don't use the word dispositions, but they say they need a sense of self. They get that grit is in there somewhere. They understand that there's deep skills and knowledge. They know that math matters, and they can answer that question. So what's involved and how does it work? Well, we'd say to them, instead of this triad, we offer them a different view. We say, if there's a system that needs to be in place, playing in concert together. We talk to them about the idea that learning happens in a lot of different places, that people move from place to place, kind of like, bumblebees, and they bring learning around, and it grows, and it matures, and it nurtures into knowledge. And it's the reason things are troubled are not because we got bad teachers who don't care. It's because they lack scaffolding and support. People understand these metaphors. There's spotty charging stations. Kid needs to be re-energized, and school saps the energy out of them. It doesn't move them forward. What we need in the advancement is weaving of these ropes. Education is kind of like cooking. The joke is I've been using these metaphors through my engagement, and there's a reason. These are tested frames that advance this conversation and allow people to move from a position of going back to the basics to one where they're thinking creatively about a future. It moves them out of a frame about individualism and one toward community success, and we're banking on it. And it allows you to understand that the path forward the answer isn't what we can't, it's that we can. And we need to think about education reform like renovating an old house and using our ingenuity so that we can do this and reverse this problem. Because I'll tell you, people have a very hard time becoming sympathetic for subgroups of people who are not like them. But Americans despise injustice and inequity across communities. Believe it or not, it's one of the reasons why we're all willing to pay the taxes necessary for Superfund cleanups. No one should live on a toxic waste dump, and we'll pay for that every day. But we continue to frame things as competition between subgroups and opportunities for individuals, and that's got to change. But I'm here to tell you it's actually not enough because this is the thing where I exhort you to work on something that is something I really don't understand how to unpack, but I know is necessary. So these conversations about community, they run and accelerate attention to some pretty deep issues. They run and accelerate attention to teachers and unions. They accelerate attention around funding and money. And they drive local conversations right into the great roadblock, the most confusing, insidious, and complex issue of our time, which is race, racism, and racial injustice. So the good news is that they advance these conversations and they open them up. The bad news is that they occur, and they're hard to have, but we need to have them. And one of the ways forward is to think a little differently about the roles we play in this great effort. Because I'm here today to say that it's become very apparent to me that, whether it's the incidents you see on TV and the risks that young men of color and women of color have every day out with people who are meant to protect them and who do protect them, or whether it's the finding a couple of months ago that seemed to go sort of unnoticed, that I was kind of shocked that people weren't talking more about the fact that there are 1.5 million black men missing. That when you have 100 African American women in a community, there are only 85 black men to count on. And in a place like Ferguson, it's 60. So we know where they are. They're in jail, they're dead, they're missing, they're absent. That's a diaspora. It's a tragedy. And it's something we need to reverse. And I'll tell you, thank you, I appreciate that, but this is a hard thing to say, but I will say that, one of the solutions is that some of us need to just get up off the sidelines. And I'm talking about white America. Because we've been enjoying the benefits of a quiet calm in our time when our communities of color are struggling. And I'll tell you, this is not, I speak from this profile. And I am not some magical missionary who's got this all figured out. I struggle every day with the issues of race, in my organization, in my community, and in my work. But I know that stepping forward has rewards. It's risky, it's scary, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. White people just feel bad a lot about racism. And that's okay. I got some good news for you. Your allies of color know this. They're used to it. The better news is they haven't given up on us. They still have expectations of us. But we need to upstand and stand up and move forward. Now, many of you are off the sidelines. Many of you are off the sidelines. You don't spend time watching, you're engaging. Your jobs are off the sidelines. But there's more we need to do because it's a lonely mission. I'm here to say our communities of color are not responsible for instructing us about how to do it either. This is something we need to figure out. And we can figure it out. Now, I'll tell you, my friends of color, they're willing to help. You know, they haven't given up. They know I'm a good guy. I'm trying hard. And they just want me to keep trying. They're like, Nick, you're an ally. You're an imperfect ally. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing to be. I get scared. I get awkward. I don't know how to do it. I know that the cause of this is tolerance of the inequity we have, and the solution is about relationship. It's about building bridges and coming to understand and including and intentionally embracing a more diverse personal community. Because I'll tell you, there's people who showed up in Selma on the bridge to join the march, the white people who traveled, who in some ways made a difference, stepped up. Now, it's not up to us to lead the effort. This is a challenge that communities of color need to be encouraged and lead, and one of our roles is to promote leadership and support and scaffolding and really build the leadership of communities of color and leaders of color in this country. But we also have to go and join the bridge. Now, you guys stand out in the bridge every day. Well, my exhortation to you is to make this a friends and family plan. Anybody have a phone thing where you get the friends and family included? Okay? Challenging, fighting racial injustice can be a family event. It can be a road trip. It can be a vacation. But it takes courage. It takes determination. And I don't know what the right lever is. And this is the part where I'm exhorting you to do something without the tools or knowledge about how to do it. It's a messy cause, but I'll tell you, advancing a positive future for education in this country is about moving student-centered learning forward through systems change that involves deep public engagement and involves the courage of us in this room working together to advance conversations about race, racial inequity, and I'll say racial injustice, but you know what? It's really about justice. And that's what the conversation we get to carry out. And that's good work. That is good work. So I encourage you to embrace the picture here and think about public engagement more deeply. The most valued messengers in our school communities are teachers and professionals. People don't like unions, they love teachers, and they listen to youth. It's about advancing this idea about renovating the house and not being satisfied with an addition or repair or even reorganization, but getting to renovation. And it's about advancing this. And it's exciting work. And maybe someday, I don't want this young man suffocating on the surface of the moon. My kids saw this and were like, Dad, is that a mistake? Did you really mean to put that slide up? But I do, because it's our future and it's our opportunity. We make big decisions in this country. So we have an opportunity. It's practical because we got some real needs we got to fill. I mean, I want my kids to have neighbors who are earning good paychecks and doing a good, and living a good life. So there's a practical need globally and at home. And then there's a moral need, right? Because it's good work. Fighting for equity and justice is good work. It feels good. It's the reason you guys keep going back to work in tough situations. But I'm here to say that it's a patriotic opportunity also. Because we have a great country. And it's going to stay great. But it depends on us. It depends on our education system and moving it forward. So I'm excited. Alfred North Whitehead said that children are the message we send to the future. And the only question is, what message are we going to send? And when I come to this Gear Up conference, I got a feeling I'm in a room full of people who want to send a message of readiness, leadership, love, community, and justice. And it's an honor to be with you, and I wish you good luck in accomplishing this important mission. Thank you very much.